Number 5. The Judas Cradle. It's somewhere in the 1500s in Spain, and the Inquisition is in full swing. The Catholic Church has decided that the best way to deal with people who disagree with them is to torture them until they agree again. And boy, did they get creative. The Judas Cradle was one of their greatest hits. Picture a wooden pyramid, about 3 feet tall, pointed at the top, mounted on a set of legs like a stool. The victim would be stripped naked, hoisted into the air by ropes, and slowly lowered onto the point. And I think you can figure out where the point went. Gravity did the rest. See, the beauty of the Judas Cradle, if you can even call it that, was that the torturer had total control over how much pain the victim experienced. They could lower you slowly over the course of hours, adding weight to your legs to speed things up, or they could pull you off and start over if you hadn't confessed yet. The pointed tip was just sharp enough to cause agonizing pain without actually killing you quickly. The whole point, no pun intended, was to keep you alive and suffering for as long as possible. And here's the part that really sends it over the edge. They never washed the thing between victims. So even if the pyramid itself didn't kill you, the infection from the last dozen people who sat on it probably would. That wasn't an oversight, that was a feature. The Inquisitors knew exactly what they were doing. They just genuinely did not care. Sessions on the Judas Cradle could last anywhere from a few hours to several days. Some records suggest that particularly stubborn prisoners were subjected to multiple sessions over the course of a week, being pulled off just long enough to recover slightly before being lowered back down again. Most people confessed to whatever they were accused of pretty quickly. Heresy, witchcraft, conspiring with the devil. Yeah, sure, I did all of it. Just get me off this thing. And honestly, can you blame them? What's wild is that the Inquisition kept detailed records of their torture methods. They were bureaucrats about it. They literally had paperwork for how long someone sat on the pyramid. It's like filling out a timesheet, but for human suffering. The Judas Cradle was also sometimes used alongside other methods. They'd combine it with sleep deprivation, keeping the victim suspended just above the tip so they couldn't rest. Every time they started to drift off, they'd slip down and impale themselves a little further. The whole process was designed to break a person's mind before their body gave out. By the time most prisoners reached day 3, they would confess to literally anything. Witchcraft, heresy, plotting to kill the Pope, didn't matter if it was true, they just wanted it to stop. Number 4. The Brazen Bull. It's around 560 BC, and a metalworker named Perilos of Athens has just invented something he's extremely proud of. He's brought it to the court of Phalaris, the tyrant of Acragas in Sicily, because he thinks this invention will make him rich and famous. It's a hollow bronze statue of a bull, life-sized, with a door in the side big enough for a person to crawl through. And that's exactly what it's for. You lock someone inside the bull, light a fire underneath it, and the bronze slowly heats up until the person inside is literally roasted alive. But here's the part Perilos was really excited about. He'd installed a series of tubes and stops inside the bull's head that converted the victim's screams into what sounded like the bellowing of an actual bull. So while someone was being cooked alive inside this thing, spectators on the outside would hear music. Perilos demonstrates the acoustic system to Phalaris, expecting praise and a fat paycheck. Phalaris is impressed. So impressed, in fact, that he decides the best way to test the invention is to lock its creator inside. And so Perilos of Athens becomes the first person ever executed in his own creation. There's a lesson in there somewhere about not building torture devices for tyrants, but I feel like it should be obvious. Phalaris reportedly used the brazen bull extensively throughout his reign. He was eventually overthrown by his own people, and, in a twist that would make even the Greek gods nod in approval, he was executed inside the very same bull. The thing basically came full circle, which is kind of poetic if you ignore how absolutely horrifying it is. The heat inside the bull could reach temperatures hot enough to slowly cook a person over the course of an hour or more. Your skin would blister and peel. Your blood would begin to boil. Your organs would slowly shut down one by one, and the whole time, the only sound anyone outside could hear was the gentle lowing of a bronze cow. Ancient entertainment was absolutely wild. Some ancient writers claim the bones of the victims would turn a sort of jewel-like color from the heat, and that Phalaris actually had them made into bracelets. Whether that's true or just ancient propaganda designed to make the guy look even worse, I honestly don't know. But the fact that it's even plausible tells you everything you need to know about the kind of guy who commissions a machine that turns screams into music. The brazen bull became so infamous in the ancient world that it was referenced by writers for centuries afterward. The Romans reportedly used their own version of it, and some early Christian accounts describe martyrs being executed inside bronze animals. The concept of being slow roasted alive while your screams are converted into entertainment stuck around in the human imagination for a very, very long time, which says something pretty disturbing about us as a species. Number 3. Ling Qi, death by 1,000 cuts. It's imperial China, somewhere around the 10th century, and a man has been convicted of a crime so serious that a simple beheading won't do. The emperor has ordered Ling Qi, a punishment so brutal that even in a world where people were regularly fed to lions for entertainment, this one stood out. Ling Qi translates roughly to death by 1,000 cuts, and the name is not an exaggeration. The victim would be tied to a wooden post in a public square, and then, piece by piece, a trained executioner would begin slicing small strips of flesh from their body. The key word there is small. This wasn't a hack job. The executioner was a professional whose entire job was to keep you alive and conscious for as long as humanly possible. He'd start with the chest or the arms, taking thin slices that bled profusely but didn't hit anything vital. The goal was to inflict maximum pain while delaying death by hours, sometimes days. Some accounts describe executioners making over 3,000 individual cuts before finally delivering the killing blow. Now, you might be thinking, surely nobody actually did this. But Ling Qi was used in China for nearly 1,000 years, from the Tang dynasty all the way up until 1905. We know it was real because there are photographs. Actual photographs from the early 1900s showing victims mid-execution. The images are so disturbing that they've been studied by philosophers and academics trying to understand the limits of human cruelty. They're out there on the internet if you want to look them up, but honestly, I really wouldn't. What makes Ling Qi particularly chilling is that it wasn't just about the pain. In Chinese culture, the body needed to be whole for the afterlife. By cutting someone to pieces, you weren't just killing them, you were destroying their soul's chance at peace in the next world. It was a punishment that extended beyond death itself. That's a level of cruelty that goes past physical and becomes genuinely existential. The punishment was typically reserved for the worst offenses: treason, mass murder, crimes against the emperor. But in some dynasties, it was also used against tax evaders and corrupt officials, which seems like a pretty aggressive audit. One famous case involved a eunuch named Liu Jin, who was sentenced to Ling Qi in 1510. According to records, the executioner made 3,357 cuts over the course of 3 days. Liu Jin reportedly survived the first 2 days before finally dying on the third. The execution was carried out in a public market while vendors continued selling vegetables around him. Just another Tuesday in Imperial China, apparently. Number 2. The Blood Eagle. It's the 9th century somewhere in Scandinavia, and a Viking warrior has just captured the man who killed his father. He's been waiting years for this moment. A simple death would be too merciful. This calls for something special, something his father's spirit can watch from Valhalla and know that his death has been properly avenged. This calls for the Blood Eagle. Now, there's been debate among historians about whether the Blood Eagle was actually performed, or if it was just something the Norse poets made up to sound tough. But multiple sagas describe it in enough detail that most scholars believe it probably happened at least a few times. And here's how it supposedly worked. The victim would be placed face down. A blade would be used to cut open the skin along the spine. Then, one by one, the ribs would be hacked away from the backbone and pried outward until they stuck out from the body like wings, while the victim was still alive and breathing. And then, as a final touch, the lungs would be pulled out through the opening and draped over the exposed ribs. The wings would flutter as the victim took their last agonizing breaths, creating the image of a bloody eagle. The most famous account comes from the saga of Ragnar Lothbrok. When Ragnar, one of the most legendary Viking warriors of all time, was captured and killed by King Aelle of Northumbria by being thrown into a pit of snakes, his sons vowed revenge. When they finally captured Aelle, they performed the blood eagle on him. The sagas describe Aelle's back being carved open while he was still very much alive, his ribs cracked and spread, his lungs pulled out and laid upon his shoulders. Whether every detail is historically accurate or not, the fact that the Vikings told these stories to each other as examples of what happens when you mess with the wrong family tells you a lot about the culture. This wasn't a punishment for petty crime. This was reserved for the kind of insult that could only be answered with the most savage, theatrical form of execution imaginable. You didn't just kill your enemy, you turned his body into a message. Some historians have argued that the blood eagle is just a misinterpretation of poetic language in the sagas, that phrases about carving an eagle on someone's back were metaphorical, not literal. But other scholars point out that the Norse had plenty of perfectly normal ways to describe killing someone, and they specifically chose to describe this process in graphic, step-by-step detail across multiple independent sources. At some point, you have to accept that maybe, just maybe, these guys actually did it. The Vikings were many things, but subtle was not one of them. One thing that makes the blood eagle even more disturbing is the ritual aspect. Some accounts describe the executioner rubbing salt into the open wound while the ribs were being spread apart. Whether this was to add to the pain or had some kind of religious significance, nobody's really sure. But the blood eagle wasn't just an execution. It was a ceremony, a sacrifice to Odin. The victim wasn't just being killed, they were being offered to the gods as proof that their killer was worthy of their father's legacy. When you think about it from that perspective, the cruelty wasn't a bug, it was the entire point. Number 1. Scaphism, the boats. And finally, we've arrived at what is quite possibly the worst way any human being has ever been killed. This one comes from ancient Persia, roughly around the 5th century BC. It's called scaphism, and even after researching all 5 of these punishments, this is the only one that genuinely made me feel sick. Here's how it worked. The victim would be stripped naked and placed inside a hollowed-out wooden boat. A second, identical boat would be placed on top, creating a shell with the person's head, hands, and feet sticking out through holes cut into the sides. So far, not great, but nothing you can't handle. Just wait. The executioners would then force-feed the victim a mixture of milk and honey until they developed severe diarrhea. Then, they'd smear more milk and honey all over the exposed parts of their body, their face, their hands, their feet, paying special attention to their eyes, ears, mouth, and genitals. Then, they'd take this human milk and honey sandwich and set it adrift in a stagnant swamp. And then they'd wait. The honey and milk would attract every insect in the area. Flies, ants, wasps, beetles, all of them swarming around the exposed flesh, feeding on the sweet mixture, laying eggs in every crevice they could find. The diarrhea pooling inside the boats would breed maggots and more insects that would begin eating the victim from the inside out. All while the person was still alive, still conscious, still being force-fed milk and honey every day by their captors to make sure they didn't die of dehydration too quickly. The most detailed account we have comes from the Greek historian Plutarch, who describes a Persian soldier named Mithridates who was executed this way after accidentally killing the Persian prince Cyrus the Younger. According to Plutarch, Mithridates lasted 17 days before he finally died. 17 days of being slowly consumed alive by insects while floating in a swamp, unable to move, unable to escape, unable to do anything but scream. By the time his captors finally pried the boats apart, his body had been so thoroughly consumed that there was barely anything recognizable left. His flesh had been eaten away. His organs were filled with insects. He had essentially been digested alive. What makes scaphism uniquely horrifying compared to every other punishment on this list is the time. The brazen bull kills you in an hour. The blood eagle is over in minutes. Even lingchi, as slow as it is, caps out at about 3 days. Scaphism kept people alive and suffering for over 2 weeks. 2 weeks of insects burrowing into your body, eating you alive from the inside out, while your captors showed up every morning with more milk and honey to keep the cycle going. It wasn't just a punishment. It was a project.